What are the first things you think of when you hear Marie Antoinette's name? The French Revolution? Her extravagance and love for fashion? What about her being guillotined to answer for her supposed crimes against the French people? These were probably the ideas floating around in my head when my eyes landed on the DVD cover of Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette in my school library. I had never seen the film when it was first released in 2006, and I was curious, so I thought, hey, why not? I had no idea that I would completely fall in love with this film. Everything about it captivated me. The costumes, the soundtrack, the scenery. But what I loved most of all was how the central character is depicted in such a fresh and unique way. Marie may have been born more than 260 years ago, but Coppola chooses to present her less as a queen from some bygone era and more as a lonely teenage girl. As such, we as the audience are able to empathize with her and relate to her in a way we might not have been able to otherwise. Female loneliness is not a new theme for Coppola, who has also explored what it is like being a woman in a male-dominated world in films such as her directorial debut The Virgin Suicides, released in 1999, and The Beguiled, released in 2017. I should perhaps mention, if you hadn't known this already, that the women Coppola focuses on in her films tend to be white with a certain degree of privilege. It is therefore unsurprising that the filmmaker would turn her attention to Marie Antoinette. She exemplifies all the traits of a typical Coppola protagonist. She's a woman, she's white, and she's very privileged. She's even played by Kirsten Dunst. But all of this has exposed Coppola to criticism for the lack of women of color in her films, and that criticism was especially vehement when she decided to erase black characters from her adaptation of The Beguiled. I don't want to go too much into that here. I'm just going to add some links to some great articles I read whilst doing research for this video to the description, not only about the Beguiled controversy, but also about representation in general in Coppola films. So though I'm not going to talk about that here, I thought it was still important to mention, even briefly, as a way of recognizing that though Coppola has become well known for depicting femininity and women on screen, it is still a very narrow depiction. Marie Antoinette gives us a sympathetic portrayal of a historical figure whose legacy is still contentious. While most modern historians have provided a more balanced assessment of the 18th century queen, she is still synonymous with frivolous extravagance and decadence in the popular imagination, embodying all the worst traits of the Ancien Régime. I think what epitomizes Marie Antoinette's negative reputation best is the fact that even today, being likened to her can have pejorative connotations. To suggest that a public figure, particularly one involved in politics, is behaving like Marie Antoinette can be a simple yet effective way of implying that the person in question is spendthrift, out of touch, or indifferent to the plight of ordinary people. Political cartoonists are also aware of her notoriety and exploit it to great effect when they want to lampoon someone by drawing them as Marie Antoinette. In these drawings, you might also see the lampooned person saying, "Let them eat cake," or some variation of it. And finally, we get to that saying. It would have been impossible to make a video about Marie Antoinette without mentioning "let them eat cake," something she is supposed to have said after hearing that the French people had no bread. Even though it has been disproved that she said it, the phrase is still associated with Marie Antoinette, used to symbolize her excessive lifestyle as well as her lack of concern about the impoverished. The film even begins with Marie surrounded by cake, in reference to the saying. On the other side of this coin of persistent infamy, there are plenty of people who simply appreciate Marie Antoinette for her aesthetic appeal. As one of the most famous women in history, she has been absorbed into popular culture. She has and continues to inspire fashion, art, music, books, and even video games. But even if one remembers her in this way rather than in a negative light, it is still easy to lose sight of the real person and simply view her as one-dimensional or a caricature. That is why Coppola's Marie Antoinette is important, since it allows us to see her as a real person. Full of lingering shots and contemplative in mood, the film is told from her perspective and made with the intention of trying to understand her rather than judging her. Of course, the French Queen has been portrayed many other times on film. Since watching the 2006 biopic, I've seen two other depictions of Marie Antoinette. One, played by Jane Seymour in the French language La Révolution Française, released in 1989, and the other, voiced by Laurie Fraser in Mr. Peabody and Sherman, released in 2014. Mr. Peabody and Sherman features a very simplified retelling of the French Revolution, which is understandable since it's a children's film. But even so, it reinforces the idea that Marie was the sole cause of the downfall of the monarchy, with her expensive tastes and love of cake. There isn't even any mention of King Louis XVI. La Révolution Française is fairer in its portrayal of Marie Antoinette, but the film isn't told from anyone's point of view, let alone Marie's, so, just like in Mr. Peabody and Sherman, we view her with an outsider's perspective, meaning we are not always able to understand her motivations or her behaviour. I also think that the traditions and customs of the French court should have been conveyed a bit more, so that Marie's spending habits are put into context. For example, near the beginning of the film, we hear a minister talking to the king about the country's debts and making a pointed reference to the personal expenses of the queen. It is true that she spent a lot of money, it would be useless to deny it, but so too did the king and other members of the royal family. The minister does list other reasons for the state's money problems, such as the expenses of the French court, but to avoid Marie being so singled out, I think it would have been better if the film had shown other members of the royal family spending a lot too, as well as the nobility and the clergy, to expose the wider cultural practices within the upper classes which led to the revolution. Going back to the 2006 film, I see it as an important counterbalance to portrayals that have resorted to simplistic conclusions about who the Queen was. It does not absolve her of all her faults, nor should it, because she definitely was not blameless. For one thing, she rejected any type of possible reform in the early days of the revolution, which could have benefited the state and saved the monarchy. But by witnessing the various trials Marie has to endure, being treated as a commodity rather than a person, encountering blame for 7 years of unconsummated marriage, and struggling to adapt to the French court, we can re-evaluate how we perceive this individual, less as a hero or a villain, and more as a very flawed human being. This video is going to be a combined review and analysis of the film. I'm also going to be making reference to Antonia Fraser's 2001 biography, Marie Antoinette, The Journey, which the film is based on, to make a final conclusion about the Queen at the end. So let's get started. The film begins in Austria, showing a 14-year-old Marie Antoinette, or Antoine as she's called by her mother, living a comfortable though informal life in the Viennese court. That is before she must leave everything she knows and travel to France after being promised to the Dauphin, the future King Louis XVI. After travelling for days, our main protagonist enters a tent bridging the border between Austria and France. Upon walking in on the Austrian side, Marie is stripped of all her clothes and accessories and changed into a new outfit before emerging out onto French territory, thus marking her transition from Austrian Archduchess to French Dauphine. Wide-eyed and eager to please, we witness Marie meeting her future husband, played by Jason Schwartzman, for the first time. His greeting to her is polite but somewhat stiff, before they make the journey to her new home. I don't think I can pinpoint a favourite scene or moment in the film, but seeing the procession of carriages making its way to Versailles, all while the radio department's I Don't Like It Like This is playing, is a definite highlight for me. I don't know what it is about it, but I think it's because it signals not only a new beginning for Marie, but also the introduction of Versailles to the story as its main backdrop, a sort of silent witness to what will be some of the most significant moments in the young woman's life. The fact that the palace and grounds of Versailles were actually used as shooting locations lends Marie Antoinette the extra degree of authenticity, and after visiting the landmark myself in 2014, it made me appreciate the film so much more. Becoming the Dauphine means Marie has to encounter a great deal of public scrutiny. From the moment she arrives at her new home and steps out of her carriage, all eyes are on Marie. Those private moments we all take for granted, like waking up in the morning and eating our breakfast, are no longer private for her. Marie has become a public attraction, readily available for everyone to gawk at and pass judgment on. The French court is a lot more rigid than what Marie is used to, and I love the way Coppola captures this stifling, claustrophobic atmosphere in one dinner scene. You hear the diners commenting on the Dauphine as well as each other, culminating in one remarking, "It will be interesting to see how long she lasts." A special mention has to go to Molly Shannon and Shirley Henderson as the royal aunts, who are hilariously catty, pretending to be Marie's new friends, all while bitching about her behind her back, typically taking aim at her Austrian origins. Another cause of their gossiping is Marie and Louis's failure to consummate their marriage, and such is the way of the world, all the blame is heaped on the woman. Never mind the fact that Louis is more interested in hunting, and both he and Marie are too shy and awkward around each other. As far as most people are concerned, the lack of physical intimacy between the couple is Marie's fault. This is an opinion also shared by her mother, who constantly admonishes the teenager through numerous letters. Another favourite moment of mine is Marie staring out looking dejected after reading yet another critical letter from her mother. Hearing her stern words in voiceover, the camera zooms slowly into Marie's face until she turns her teary eyes straight at the camera, as if to say, "Unfair, right?" To cope with this unjust pressure, further compounded by the humiliation of seeing her sister-in-law give birth before she does, Marie turns to retail therapy, reveling in a whirlwind of clothes, sweet treats and champagne that are flashed across the screen in eye-popping color, appropriately accompanied by Bow Wow Wow's "I Want Candy." And so throughout the rest of the film, we see the young woman trying to make the best of her situation by finding fun and pleasure where she can. Whether that is sneaking out to Paris for a masked ball, or enjoying a boozy birthday party shortly after becoming Queen of France. Marie attempts to relieve the constraints of duty and obligation by filling her time up with distractions, even if these distractions are superficial or fleeting in nature. Going back to Coppola's recurring theme of female loneliness, it's interesting to observe that even though Marie is outwardly surrounded by people, she is still an isolated figure, and the filming techniques the director deploys makes that clear. The film features several long shots of a solitary Marie, dwarfed by the impressive architecture of Versailles, perhaps to represent the heavy burden of expectation that she cannot escape. The film also includes many closer-up shots of Marie enjoying quiet moments of reflection, like when she's traveling to France and breathes on the glass window of her carriage to doodle a quick sketch with her finger, or lounging on a sofa after a bath. These non-dialogue scenes are among my favorites, revealing so much to the viewer without a word even being spoken. From the very beginning of the film, we realize that Marie Antoinette is not going to be your typical historical biopic, with the heady guitar riffs of post-punk band Gang of Four blasting over the introductory credits, which are printed across the screen in electric pink font. Featuring deliberately anachronistic dialogue and costumes, as well as an eclectic blend of post-punk and new wave sounds, Coppola defiantly tears up the rulebook on what a period film should look and sound like. At one point, we even get a brief glimpse of a pair of blue Converse trainers. All these artistic choices help to emphasize Marie's youth and make it easier for us to imagine life in her shoes. Coppola does not intend the film to be a historically faithful account of Marie's life. Rather than being overly preoccupied with what exactly happened and when, the director is more interested in exploring the emotions and feelings of a young woman leading an affluent, albeit directionless existence. Despite the birth of Marie's long-awaited children, we start to witness her popularity dwindling, to the point that she is labelled Queen of Debt by her detractors and becomes a target of hostility and mockery in scurrilous political pamphlets. If I had to point out any possible weaknesses in the film, I'd say that not enough is done to explain why or how Marie became so unpopular. The political pamphlets are briefly mentioned, but I think more should have been made of them and their impact on public opinion, namely making her a convenient target to blame for all the state's problems because she was a woman and she was foreign. I also wish there had been more substantial dialogue between Marie and her lover Count Axel von Fersen, played by Jamie Dornan. The on-screen chemistry between the actors is good, but a few extra lines would have lent their characters' relationship more emotional weight, and made Fersen's eventual departure from Versailles more poignant. But these are small quibbles, and I can live with them because the film is still so enjoyable. The film culminates in the royal family's forced departure from Versailles, a sombre event contrasting so much with the optimistic circumstances of Marie's arrival at the palace 19 years previously. The shots of Marie and Louis looking out from their carriage at the gardens bathed in the rays of a setting sun are moving and quite powerful, marking not only the end of their time at the palace, but also the demise of absolute monarchy and the privileged way of life that came with it. That message is emphasized by the film's final shot of Marie's ransacked room. It perfectly symbolizes her eventual fate in a subtle, slightly ominous way, and the effect is almost haunting. And that was Marie Antoinette, an engaging, innovative blend of old and new cultural references, featuring a charming performance by Kirsten Dunst, who manages to capture Marie's vulnerability and quiet defiance. In my opinion, it is one of the most iconic films of the noughties, and I see it as a forerunner of later historical films, like The Death of Stalin and The Favourite, which also provide us with a less conventional and more satirical, tongue-in-cheek interpretation of history. After reading Antonia Fraser's biography, as well as a few other sources, I conclude that Marie Antoinette lacked the education and political acumen which could have helped her protect and preserve her position in a changing society. The fact that she came from Austria, a traditional enemy of the French, didn't help her case either. As said by Fraser in her epilogue, given that it is evidently a deep primitive urge to blame one individual when things go wrong, what better scapegoat to discover in a monarchy in crisis than a foreign princess? One only has to think of Henrietta Maria, French Catholic wife of Charles I in the years leading up to the English Civil War, or, going forward to the 19th century, of the daughter of Queen Victoria, married to the Crown Prince of Germany, who was pilloried as the Englishwoman. But as I said earlier on, Marie rejected possible reforms which could have helped her people, and as someone raised to believe in the divine right of kings, she could not or would not understand why the French people were revolting against the monarchy and the establishment. You could say she was neither wholly innocent nor wholly guilty, rather hovering somewhere between the two. So that's the end of my review/analysis video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd encourage you to check out all the sources I used for research. They're listed in the description below. Please also share your comments. I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you agree with what I said, or is there anything I missed? Was there a particular element or moment from the film you liked, which I didn't mention? What are your opinions on Marie Antoinette the person? Do you think her negative reputation is justified, or does she deserve a reappraisal? Please put it in the comments, and thank you for watching.